So before we start learning Redux, first let's understand what is Redux. So Redux is a state management library for JavaScript applications. In other words, Redux is used to manage the data or state of complex JavaScript applications. Now you might ask, what is state management? Let me explain you with the example. So here we created an e-commerce application with complex user interface. Now in this part, users will add items into their shopping carts. Now user add items and we have to show the number of items in shopping cart at the header, or we can show more details on another part of page. Now in this situation, we have to sync, or we can say manage our application state. So our application works great. Now you might ask, how Redux will manage our application state? So in Redux, we create a JavaScript object for storing all state of our applications. So all details about shopping cart list is in one JavaScript object, and we call it as a store. You can imagine the store as a database for our frontend. Now wherever we want to display that details, we simply call that data from Redux store, and we don't need to get worried about syncing data manually. There are many state management tools like Flux, MobX, and Redux. Redux is the most popular tool for state management. Now the good thing about Redux is you can use Redux with React, Angular, Vue, or with vanilla JavaScript. With Redux, we can centralize our application state. Redux will make our data flow transparent. We can easily debug our applications with one of the best debugging tool. And we can also preserve the page state of that application. We will see all of these later in this course. Now all advantages are come with disadvantages. First one is a lot of developers are find Redux very complex. But that is not true. I think they find it complex because Redux is based on some functional programming concepts. Don't worry about that, we will see all that concepts soon. And another disadvantage is, for Redux, we have to write a lot of boilerplate code. So in this course, first I will show you the traditional way to write Redux code. And after that, we will write code in the modern way. So you don't need to write a lot boilerplate. So when we have to use Redux, I will explain that in the next lesson. So here is a guy called Harley. He is a new software developer and he learned about Redux. Now when he start any new JavaScript project, he always add Redux in that project. But this is very linear way of thinking. We have to think about what problem we are going to solve. So if we have complex user interfaces or data flow is complex, then in my opinion, we have to use Redux. If we have a small or medium size of applications, or we have simple user interface and the data in our application is static, then Redux is not good for that. It just put more load on your application, and again you have to write a lot of code. So don't use Redux because it is popular. Just look at the problem and see, is Redux fit for that or not. Because if you have to stand out from other developers, you have to be an active problem solver. Don't use any tools because they are popular. Even Dan Abramov, the creator of Redux, write a blog post, "You might not need Redux." That blog is really good. Nowadays, almost 50 to 60% React and Angular websites use Redux for state management. So if you are a developer, then you might get next project or website that needs Redux. So watch this complete course. I promise you, you will master Redux from this course. First of all, let's set up our environment for this course. So download resources zip from this section and unzip it. So in the resources folder, you will get folder called Redux Starter. So open that folder in VS Code. Here you get the basic project created with Webpack. If you might not familiar with Webpack, it is the bundler for bundle our JavaScript code in one file and then link with our browser. In simple words, we can write our JavaScript code in multiple files using Webpack. This is just for you that you learn Redux in same manner as you will apply it in React or Angular. They have also Webpack, so don't worry about that. So open up terminal with Ctrl plus backtick or Command plus backtick and write npm install and hit enter. This will install all dependencies for this project. Now in this webpack.config file, first we declare the entry point of the application, which is index.js file in resource folder. Now this webpack combine all file code and generate the file app.js in this dist folder. And in this index.html file, you can see we link app.js file. And at the end, we define our contact base, which automatically pick this index.html file and run it on the port 3000. Simple as that. So back to terminal and write npm start, which I declare in package.json file, and hit enter. Now open up browser and in the URL write localhost 3000 and see we get this Redux starter project. Now let's open console. We also get Redux starter project. This project will help you a lot when you're trying to integrate Redux in your React or Angular applications. So imagine this starter project as React or Angular application. Now let's start this amazing journey. Let's understand how Redux works in our application. So as I told you in the first section, we use Redux for managing the state of web application, especially which have little complex UI structure. So in Redux, we store our application's all state in a single object called store. So when some component need a data of particular thing, then we get that state from the single place which is store. So imagine we have social media website like Instagram or Facebook. Then this store object is look like this. Now setting these fields are entirely up to us. How we design our store structure is on us. Redux don't interfere in those things. But remember, one application has only one single Redux store, because that's the overall concept of using Redux. Now to update this state, we use a pure function called reducer. This reducer take the current state as argument and return the updated state. Simple as that. This reducer function don't make any HTTP request or anything with DOM elements or don't create any kind of side effects. Reducer just take current state as parameter and return the updated state. And that's why we call reducer as a pure function. So in reducer, we update the state using spread operator or immer library. Now you might ask how this reducer will know what tasks they have to perform. For example, if we have to-do list application, how this reducer will know they have to add the task or remove the task. So for that, we pass one more argument in our reducer function, which is action. Now with this action, we can tell reducer which task they have to perform. And according to this, our reducer perform the task. So there are only three main things about Redux: actions, store, and reducers. Let me explain you how these three things work together. So again, we are taking example of to-do application. So when user add a new task, which means user dispatch an action to the Redux store. Then Redux store pass that action to its reducer. Now reducer perform the action and then update the store values according to this action. So we can't directly call reducers, we have to use store for calling reducer. So there is only one entry point for this store. The benefit of this approach is we can simply track or log the activity performed in our application, which will help us to easily debug our application. So basically we can say that actions tell store what to do, reducer perform how to do, and store keep the data in single place. Simple as that. And that's all about Redux. In this current section, we will see how to write code for this. So throughout this section, we are going to build one Redux application for to-do app in which we can add task, remove the task, and mark task as completed. For now, we are not building the UI part because I don't want to add extra complexity for you. So our main focus is on Redux, not on UI part. Don't worry, we will cover UI part when we integrate our Redux store with our React application. So to implement Redux, we have to follow few steps. First one is designing the store. In this step, we will design the structure of our store, or we can say we define how our store look like. After that, we list our actions which can perform in application. And after that, we create our reducer function for define how to perform that actions. And finally, we create our Redux store. So let's start with step number 1. So let's design the store structure for this to-do application, or we can say how we want to store data in the store. So for now, we want to add just task for this application. So we store all our task details in array. So our store look like this. For each task, we add object in this array. This single object for task has 3 properties: its unique ID, task details, and completed property. By default, we set completed to false. Now in real world, our store is an object. So it's easy to get data from the store. So instead of an array, we have object with properties. Let's say we have property like task and that store the array of task. Now we have another property, let's say employees. So this employees stores array about all employees informations. So in this situation, our store has 2 slices. One is task and second is employees. So we have to add 2 reducers for each of them. For now, we don't want that complexity. We will do that in the upcoming sections where we can see how to combine different reducers into single reducer. So finally, we just need array as the store in which we define our all tasks. So we completed our first step. Now let's move to second step, which is listing all actions for our application. So first of all, we want to add new task with task details. So our first action will add task. Now after that, we can remove that task from the list. So second action will remove task. And we can also mark task as completed. So last action will task completed. In advance, we have also other features like filtering the task list, search the task, and many more. For now, we just focus on these features. So at the beginning of this section, I told you that action will say what to do. So in Redux, every action is an object and the structure of this object is fixed. So every action object has at least one property, which is type, or we can say the name of action. For example, our first action is add task. So our action object look like this, type to add task. Here we are using string, but some developers use numbers like 1, 2 or 3. I like strings because it is more descriptive than number. We can easily understand that this action will add the new task. Here some developers use all uppercases, but you can also use task added or anything you want to. I personally like this add task. You can use whatever you want to, but stick with that for the rest of that application. Now after that, we can pass data inside this object. So for add task, we send the task details and this is completely fine. Now we have second action, which is remove task. Now we will remove the particular task by using its unique ID. So we pass here just ID. Now this is not the right approach because our action structure is changing with different actions. So when we define reducer, we always have to check what is the other field in the action object, whether it is task or it is an ID. So commonly, we fix our action structure throughout this project. So for action, we first pass type and then we have payload property in which we have all data related to that action. So you don't have to watch actions when we define reducers because you already know they have only two property, type and payload. Remember, this is commonly used structure. We can also change that, but almost all developers follow this structure. So we have list of actions. Now in the next lesson, we create reducer for our application. Now let's start one of the most important steps for Redux, which is creating the reducer. As I told you previously, reducer is a pure function which takes two arguments. First one is initial state and second one is action object. So in source folder, let's create a new file called reducer.js. Now let's create a function called reducer. And first argument is state and second argument is action. So previously we designed a store like only array of tasks. So our initial state is empty array. Now inside this reducer, first we have to identify the action type and then we perform action according to that. So in action object, we pass our action name as type property and we will pass all data in payload. So here we write if action.type equals to add task, then we return array and in that array, first we copy all values from state with spread operator. So this state has all values of our tasks. And after that, we simply add object with some properties. Now first of all, we want to add unique ID for each task. So we create a new variable called ID and set to 0. Now in ID property, we simply increment ID number. Now next property of this object is task, which is action.payload.task. This task property we will pass in payload object. And last property, which is completed and set to default false. So when we call action for add task, we just need to send task in payload because we are only using this task from the payload. There are no need to pass unusual data in payload. Now let's add for remove task. So we write else if action.type equals to remove task. And inside this, we return filter data by task ID. So state.filter task arrow function, and here we add condition task.id not equals to action.payload.id. So for this remove task action, we will pass only id in payload which we want to remove. And after all these conditions, we return the current state. So if we call any action which is not handled here, this reducer will return the same state. So that's it. This is the reducer for task related actions. You can see how simple and easy it is. Now some developers also use switch case instead of these if conditions, which is in my opinion more easy to implement. So I comment out this code and we use switch, and here we pass the action.type because we want to check this property. Now in switch, we have different cases like case, add task and colon. Now here we copy this return and paste it here. Now after that, we define one more case which is remove task. and copy this return statement from here and paste it. Now in switch case, we can pass default case, and in that we return current state. So if we call any action which is not available in these cases, then this default case will run. So this both code work the same. Now it's on you what you like. I personally like this switch case method. So I remove these conditions and see our reducer is look clean and easy to read. So always remember, reducer is pure function which perform how to do. Now let's create our Redux store. So we create another file here called store.js. So creating a Redux store is one of the most hard thing. Just kidding, it is one of the easiest thing. So to create a store, we have one method in Redux called createStore. So let's install the Redux library for our project. Open up terminal and write npm I redux and hit enter. Let's verify this Redux library is installed or not. So go to the package.json file. Here in the dependencies, we have Redux version 4.2.0. If you are watching this course after 3 to 6 months, you probably have updated version. But I bet you this code will also work for that version. So don't worry about that. Now back to our store.js file and we import createStore method from Redux. Now here we get this deprecated warning for createStore method. In programming languages, deprecated means this feature is supported but it is not recommended. So scroll down in this warning. Here you can read the reason why they show this warning. And here see, if you want to use createStore without this visual deprecation warning, use the legacy createStore. And below that, we get its import statement. So let's copy this and paste it here. Don't worry, I will show you the modern way to implement Redux in upcoming section. For now, let's focus on learning Redux. Now we call this createStore function, and inside this, we have to pass our root reducer. Root reducer is nothing but just a combination of all reducers. But here, we have only one reducer, that's why we can directly pass our reducer. So back to our reducer.js file, and let's export default this reducer. And in this store.js file, we import reducer from reducer module. Now let's simply pass this reducer in this function. So this function will return our store with its method. So let's store that in constant called store. And at the bottom, we will also export default this store. And that's it. You can see how simple it is to create Redux store. Just we have to use createStore method and pass our root reducer as parameter. Now go to the index.js file and let's import our store from store module. And just simply console.log this store. Save the changes and take a look. See, we get the store here. Now this store has few methods like dispatch, which is used for dispatching the action, getState for getting the current state, and we have two more methods. We will talk about them soon. For now, let's console the current state of the store. So write store.getState and save it. Back to browser and see, we get empty array. So for Redux, we have to learn very few properties. Now our Redux store is ready. So let's dispatch some actions with using dispatch method. So let's write store.dispatch. Now previously we designed action, which is an object with two properties. First one is type and second one is payload, which holds all data. So pass object and type to task added or add task What was that? Let's check this out. So back to our reducer, and here it is add task. Note that these two strings has to be the same. So we pass add task, and after that payload is an object. And for add task, we need only one property called task, which we use in reducer here. So I write task1 and that's it. We only need to do this. Save the changes and take a look. See, we have one task in this store, id 1, task to our task, and completed to false. Perfect. So we will write this code on add task button in UI and pass input box value in this payload object. Now let's remove this task. So we call another store.dispatch method and pass object with property type, which is remove task. And in the payload, we simply add id of the task, which is 1. Now let's duplicate this line for getting state and move that here. Save the changes and take a look. See, first we get the task in our array, and after that the task removed from store. Now here you can see we have to write a big object for dispatching each action, and that will make our code messy. So let's define our actions in a separate file. So create a new file called action.js. Now let's define our first action. So I create function called add task, arrow function, and what we need to do here, we have to just return the object for add task. So I simply copy this object, and inside this we return this object. Now we have to replace this string with task parameter, and we pass that parameter in this function. So when we call add task function, we just need to pass here our task, and the task will automatically add here. Now let's export this function. Note that I am not export as default, we just export this function. So we can import that with the name of function. So back to index.js file, and at the top we import add task function from action module. And here we call that function and pass our task as parameter. Let's say task1. Save the changes and take a look. See, it's working same as before. Now I have to implement the same thing for this remove task action. So pause this video and try to implement this. I hope you can solve this. If you don't, then watch this solution. So back to our action.js file, and we create new function called remove task, which takes only one parameter, id. Now in index.js file, we copy this object, and inside this function we return the object and just replace the id. And let's export this function also. Now back to index.js file and import remove task function, and let's replace this with our remove task function and pass the id 1. Save the changes and see, it works the same and our code looks clean. Now there is one little issue with our current implementation. So in reducer function and in action, we have to pass the same action string. Now if someday we decide to change the name of the action, then we have to change it at two different places. So for that, we create a new file called ActionTypes.js. In this file, we will save our all action strings. So we create constant add task equals to add task. Here I am using all uppercase because it's commonly used. You can also use camel case or any naming convention you want. It's totally up to you. So duplicate this line and replace the variable to remove task, and here also remove task. And we simply export these both variables. Now in the reducer file, we import all as action types from ActionTypes. Let's replace this string with ActionTypes.addTask and this with ActionTypes.removeTask. Save this and we do the same with action file. So copy this import statement and paste it into action.js file. And let's replace this with ActionTypes.addTask and this with ActionTypes.removeTask. Now if we want to change the string, then we have to change that at only one place. Simple as that. Now this Redux store has one more method called subscribe. So we call store.subscribe. Now in this function, we pass callback function. So we simply write here console.log updated and print the current state store.getState. So if we subscribe to Redux store, then this function will run every time when something changed in our Redux store state. In simple words, it's work like YouTube subscribe. If you subscribe to YouTube channel, then when that channel add a new post or video, you will get notified. Same works here. This callback function will run when something change in the Redux store. This is useful for UI part when you have application in vanilla JavaScript. So we can change our data with this function. And if you have React, then we re-render our application. We will see that in section of integrating Redux in React application. So save this and see, we get 2 times updated. Now if we add one more task, let's say task 2, then we get 3 times updated. Now this subscribe function bring unsubscribe method in it. So let's store that in constant called unsubscribe. And here we call this unsubscribe method. Now if we call this unsubscribe method, then after that if our store will change, we don't get notified. Save this and see, we have only 2 updated state. Now I hope your concepts related to Redux are gets clear. So I want to give you one exercise in which you will repeat almost all steps. And with that, you get confidence with Redux. So in this application, we want to mark our task as completed, which means we have to pass ID of the task, and in the reducer, we will change its completed property to true. So spend some time with this exercise and try to solve it. So I hope you complete this exercise, or you might stuck at only at reducer part. Honestly, that's enough, because the goal of this exercise is I want you to go through from all steps of adding new action and reducer case. So appreciate yourself for that. Now let's see the solution of this exercise. So first of all, we add a new action type for complete task, because we need it in action and reducer both. So duplicate this line and change constant to task completed, and also string task completed. Save this and head over to reducer file. Now here we write case ActionTypes.task completed, and in this we return state.map for updating the array. So task goes to, first we check condition task.id equals to action.payload.id. If it's true, then we return object and get all values of the task object by spread operator, and replace the completed property to true. And if this condition is not true, then simply return that task object. That's it. Now let's create the action for this case. So go to action.js file and we create new function called completed task. Now pass id as parameter, arrow function, and we simply return object with type ActionTypes.task completed. And in payload property, we pass object and inside it, we just pass id to id. Here you can also remove this id because in object, if property and value variable name is same, then we can remove it. Here I am keeping this for understanding. And let's export this function. Save this file and go to index.js file and we import here completed task from action. Now let's call here store.dispatch function and inside it we call complete task and pass id 2. Save this and take a look. See, here our task 2 is marked as completed. So the folder structure in Redux is very important. I have seen a lot of Redux code in unorganized way. In this lesson, we will see how to manage Redux code or the folder structure of Redux code. So currently, we store our all files in the source folder. But in real world, we have also the front-end part. And that's why this structure is hard to organize. So we place all our Redux files in the same folder called store. It's just a common name for Redux folder. You can call it whatever you want to. Just don't use Redux because we don't want to set the same name of package and folder. So we will place all our code into one single folder. Now currently in our project we only managing the task, but when we add other features in this application, then we have to create another actions, reducers and action types. So we can place these three files in subfolder called task. So in task folder, we place actions, reducers and action types for task. Then if we have another slice, let's say employees, then we place all actions, reducers and action types for employees in that employees folder. So our folder structure looks clean and maintainable. Now there is nothing wrong with this approach, but if in the future we want to add something, then we have to change in 3 different files. So in this case, we have one solution which is duck module approach. In this approach, we place all these 3 files code into one single file and give it a name task.js. Now if we want to change something, then we have to change it only in one file. So that's why we don't need these folders. We directly place these files in the store folder. If you don't want to place code in one file, you can also use the old structure. It's totally up to you. So in the next lesson, we will see how to implement this duck module approach. Let's implement duck module approach. If you don't want to implement this approach, you can move to next section. So first of all, we create a new folder in source folder called store. Now we move all files in store folder except index.js file because we are assuming that is our UI file in which we call actions. Now let's create a new file in store folder called task.js. So first of all, open ActionTypes and copy all the code from it and paste it in the task.js file. Let's add comment for ActionTypes section so we don't get confused in future. Now we don't need these exports because all of code is in one place. And let's delete this file. Great. Now let's add section for actions and open action.js file and accept this import statement. We copy all things and paste it in task.js file. Here we don't want ActionTypes.addTask because it is already up there. So select ActionTypes dot and press Ctrl plus D or Command plus D for multiple cursor and remove it. Now let's delete this action.js file, we don't need it. After that, we create the last section for reducer. Now open reducer file and accept this import statement, we copy all things and paste it in task.js file. Here, we also don't want ActionTypes dot. So select ActionTypes dot and press Ctrl plus D or Command plus D and remove it. Now let's delete this reducer.js file. Great. Note that here we export this reducer as default. So let's change the import in store.js file. So instead of this reducer module, we write task module. And because we export default at reducer, here we can directly get that. Now open index.js file and here write store/task. Now the last thing, which is we have this store/store. That's not look good. So let's rename this store.js file to configure store.js. And VS Code automatically change the name here. If it don't change, you have to change manually. And that's it. Save the changes and our application works the same as before. So I hope you understand all basic concepts of Redux. Now in the next section, we will see how to debug our Redux application. Thank you so much for watching this mini Redux course. So this mini course is 40 minutes of my ultimate Redux course, in which you learn Redux toolkit. Then we see how to debug our Redux application using very popular extension called Redux DevTools. Then we see middleware concept, which is one of the important concepts in Redux. Then we have whole section of consuming API in Redux application, in which we see various methods to call APIs and how to deal with error and loading properties. And then we see how to connect our Redux code with web application. And throughout this course, I will show you one of my best techniques to write code like pro. So overall you get 60 plus HD video lessons and exercises in each section, so you can learn Redux with practical implementation. And the best thing about this course is you get 30 days 100% money back guarantee. So if you don't like this course, then you can get your all money back. And for first 1000 students from this YouTube channel will get this course completely free. So open the link in description box and quickly enroll in the Ultimate Redux course. And if you like this course, please submit the reviews. Giving this feedback should take no more than 15 seconds. But that will give me the inspiration and motivation for creating more better courses. And it will also help me to reach more students who wants to learn Redux like you.